Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today we're going to have so much fun. I can't wait to have this discussion. When I was reading about my guest, I was thinking, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is an extremely well-educated woman, especially to be as young as you are. Oh, holy schmoly. But we are going to have so much fun today but it's going to be a very serious discussion too. So please join me in welcoming Naheed Chowdhry to our program today. Welcome, Naheed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deborah. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, we really are going to have a great discussion today. So let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we'll just dive into this. So born to parents who met while working at the USAid office in Pakistan, Naheed Chowdhry grew up in Karachi and joined corporate life with Unilever right after getting her MBA. Since then, she has worked with companies including the little guys like the Hershey Company in a multiple award-winning career that spans Asia, Australia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Even as she worked on creating the right stories, innovations, and strategies to shift mindsets, Naheed learned that many more values unite than separate people across geographies and cultures. In the last few years, Naheed has put that to use through her consulting business by asking questions that enable her clients to see new perspectives that empower them to resolve what seemed impossible. Her passion for gender bias in the workplace is based on her own experiences, as well as those of men and women she has mentored around the world. And the secret recipe is a mix of data and empathy to tell the right story and move mountains. Naheed is also the mother of 4 young global citizens aged 10 to 15, as well as a best-selling author, Adler-certified coach, seasoned improviser, and adrenalin junkie. Holy schmoly. And aside from anything else, you started doing this when you were what, like 10?
Thank you. I haven't been called young in a very long time. It felt good.
Well, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, if we told a guy he was young, he'd look at us like, really? You know, but women are like, thank you. So you obviously have had a very varied and diverse and exciting career. But tell us a little bit more about how you got to right where you are today and how you discovered that this is your passion in life.
Well, Deb, when I look back, of course, it was a winding road.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought actually that I would step outside of corporate, but that's how it happened. Because I was fortunate enough to travel to different places and work in different places around the world. I was able to have exposure to different cultures and different people. And one of the tasks that marketing people are put to is to define the red thread that runs through projects and products so that you can pick one up from one part of the world and put it in the other. And I started looking for that pattern across values and how people think and feel as well. And started to identify those. And at the same time, there were people everywhere that I went where we would typically be assigned to mentor no matter what the company. And there were a couple of common areas of concern that used to keep coming up. When you fast forward to the end of 2015, the Hershey Company was going through a restructure, and that's when I left the organization. And I set up my own organization thinking it would be one where I would tell the right story and tell it right. And one part of that would be conventional marketing, so helping companies that were new to the region that I'm in enter the market. And the other part would be to find the patterns and tell the right story about gender bias in the workplace. Because I think one is about having a story, but then getting an eye roll because there is a kind of fatigue that sets in around a lot of social issues. But the other is how to tell the story to ensure that the connection gets made. And I think that's what I'm so glad for, because as a marketer, I've realized that this is probably where I'm meant to be today, to make those connections and tell those stories. And while it began in a very product specific and consumer centric area, I think this is where I'm meant to be and meant to end up.
I love it. And we were talking before the program about gender bias and how we have obviously made steps forward, and it's going to vary country by country. And I definitely want to talk about that. But in so many ways, it's almost like it's still the 60s. When a woman is, especially maybe having to choose at a certain level of her career to go home and raise babies. So many people are like, oh, that's horrible. That's awful. You were on track to be the CEO of this company. How could you let us down? And, and then, but she wants to have a family, and of course with men, they do get to, shall we say, have it both ways. They get to have the family, they get to have the high powered career. And for women, that's just very difficult for a variety of reasons. I mean, and some of those are obviously very good, but it's, it's a challenge. And then, you have issues where people are saying, well, we don't want those emotional women running our companies. And unfortunately, on occasion, women do tend to get a little teary. Sometimes it's just because we're madder than all get out, and it's cry or hit somebody, right? But, one of the trends that I've been seeing, especially here in the United States and talking with some of my other guests, is that we are, as companies, kind of embracing having leaders who are showing more emotion, who are showing empathy, care, and concern for their employees. And let's be honest, that's women.
Yes. That is very true. I mean, there's so many points in there that it's so exciting.
I do that. I toss a whole bunch of things in.
Right. So I just think, just to Deb, talking about the last part and the challenge, and you said about women getting teary-eyed. Yes, absolutely. I think there are a couple of points in there that I'd like to comment on. One is that you're so right. It's like sometimes like we're sitting in the 60s. But if you think about it and put it into perspective, this is the result of the disparity is gender bias, is inherently unconscious bias, which goes back to the days of hunter-gatherers and caregivers. And that's like 5,000 years old. So if you take a look at that, and we're trying to shift mindsets quite quickly, actually, I mean, yeah, you can understand why several thousand years might not go away that quickly, which doesn't make it right, because people are more informed now. But you can understand why, perhaps. But I think the other thing that you touched on, which actually goes smack into a project that I'm currently working on, is women getting teary-eyed and emotional. And I've often heard that is one that I hear all around the world. And the irony of it is that for myself, being a mother of 4 children, I have to stay calm and composed at all times. And then, I'm actually in a couple of appraisals, I've been told that I'm cold. So you're either,
or you're that B word.
Yes, that we won't swear on your show. So I think what is very clear is, and this is interesting, so if you look at some of the studies that have been done on agile organizations around the world, organizational agility, there's a mix of behaviors that come together. One of those mixes is a forward-driven, aggressive kind of approach and skills that primarily men bring. The other set, and equal, is the nurturing, caregiving, and allowing to show feelings and emotions in order to get to a common place where you can all come together and deliver a better proposition. Those are skills that women specifically bring to the table. And these are becoming more and more critical, because as you can see, as social issues especially become more and more important, similar to what we're going through today, I think that side is going to be dialed up. And the need for those behaviors are going to be dialed up. Now, I will share a shocking number that I was looking at. There's a research that's been done based on 14 years of panel data on US public firms. And it says that a board that categorically has confirmed that if a board has more women than men, or is increasing the number of women in the interest of diversity and inclusion. Stakeholders believe that the priorities of that board have shifted and are not focused on financial returns.
We're
So
fluffy.
it doesn't, we're fluffy, yes, correct. Even though, and it's perception versus reality, because we know that companies with 3 or more women on boards operate and provide better financial returns. We know that. There is data. There's plenty of data to support it. But the perception is so strong that stakeholders actually believe that you're fluffy, to use your word. So a whole lot of things in there that I guess need to be tackled one step at a time.
Right. You know, and yeah, I mean, of course, when you annoy stakeholders, that tends to be an issue. And so then things go backwards because they think, well, you know, we have to switch back to make the stakeholders happy. And of course, maybe another solution would be, let's get more women stakeholders. You know? But,
point.
you know, it really is something that I just find very interesting. I left corporate America, oh gosh, almost 20 years ago. And so, you know, but obviously I still see a lot of things. And, you know, and before I was in corporate America, I worked in nonprofits. And of course, nonprofits many times have a lot of at least female employees. Now it was interesting. I worked for the American Cancer Society in Colorado, and our CEO and I believe our accounting person were I think the only 2 men in the building. Everybody else, and so but the high level positions were the men. You know, now this was 25 years ago. But the sad thing is a lot of that has not changed in 25 years.
That's very true. So the latest study by McKinsey, Women in the Workplace in 2019, shows a comparison over the last 5 years. And this is corporate America. And it shows how actually at a C-suite level, the relative percentage of women has grown, which is 24%, but it's relative because there were very few women, and you must have heard fewer women at a C-suite level in Fortune 500 than men named John. At the next level below, though, it's much worse. So, which means the succession planning for women to go into C-suite is much worse. There's insignificant progress, less than 5%. So, all available in the study that I just mentioned. So, McKinsey 2019, Women in the Workplace. Now, part of the research and the work that we do is that the pattern that we found is that, and I believe this is happening in California, it's being driven in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Illinois, I believe, so starting to, but California primarily, where you have to have women on the board. And what governments in the EU, where a lot of women, far more women are on boards, have found is that government policy or gender quotas are the best ways to ensure that there are women at the top. Because on the one hand, you're battling against a perception. It is bias. It's a perception that if there are women on the board, you know, there won't be attention to finances. And on the other hand, you have women coming in and then proving, and we've seen that across government posts as well in the recent pandemic, and how certain countries that were led by women have handled the pandemic.
Right.
So I think, and that is actually why you've seen the growth also at the top, even in the US over the past 5 years, where a policy has mandated that women need to be at the top. And so very important for both sides to step in and hold hands to grow women. Right. So that's the private sector, the corporate sector, as well as the governments.
Right. You know, and of course, the tricky thing when you mandate anything is resentment. And, you know, did somebody get that position simply because, you know, and the hard part is sometimes then we wonder it ourselves. Did we get that job just because, you know, and that's where it is really difficult. And so, you know, the key is obviously education, communication, you know, letting them know, okay, yes, this is a woman. She was the best qualified. She, you know, here is her qualifications, all those various things. And then she has to prove herself, you know, and unfortunately it might mean she has to, it is a bigger job of proving herself because she has to continually do it. But, it is something that, it is kind of sad that you have to be told you have to do this. But it was funny. We were talking before the program about mask wearing during the pandemic. It seems to only work if you're told you have to do it. But then things change and they work. And then they become habit. And that I think is the key, is then you're looking at it and it no longer, you're not looking on the employment form at that. Well, you shouldn't have it on there, especially here in the United States. It shouldn't say male or female, but you're no longer looking specifically just for a woman or a certain ethnicity or something like that. We really are just hiring the best candidates.
Absolutely. And just to your point, in places where government policies have been driving women at the top, what they've learned is that because, as you rightly said, women lack confidence and would already not know if they're good enough for the job, they overtrain for a job that normally a man or a male counterpart would have been
Right.
okay with a certain level. So this approach actually weeds out the less qualified men, and the women who come in are actually more qualified than you would expect them to be, because that's just the way they are. They would lack confidence to put them forward for a role where they were fit for it and need to be pushed. So they will be put forward when they actually are more qualified. So in a way, it helps weed out the worst. But you're right also, because I think it's so important. You hit the nail on the head that it has to become habit. But habit happens when something's happened over and over and over and over again. And I think they're growing pains. I mean, I think if the alternate is not to have any women, right, that I would rather go with this area where I agree with you. I also sometimes have my concerns, but then let's learn on the journey and use those learnings to improve the process, but get to a place, because we'll never have all the answers at the start of the journey, right? It's not a journey we've been on before. So I think it's really important to just start the journey and learn along the way. And, yeah, there will be mistakes. And then you'll adapt and move forward.
And women adapt better. Of course, that's purely a biased opinion. One of the things that I'm curious about is you have worked in many countries around the world. I think this is a universal issue, but are there some countries that are better or worse? And especially, the countries, where I didn't say this at the start, you're located in Dubai. And, some of the Middle Eastern countries, there are some countries where, women are just, definitely thought of differently. And that's the culture. What's going on? See, there I went rambling again. Let's go back to my first question. Are there countries that are doing really well at it, and then countries that are really struggling?
I think there are, because as you said, it's a universal issue. I think that every country is at a certain point in the journey. And there are different stages, and there would be developed markets like the US, Europe, Australia, that are ahead because there's been knowledge. So not just awareness. I think more important than awareness is acknowledgement. Because you may be aware it's happening and be okay with it, but there's been acknowledgement, and there are actual measures that have been put into place. So I think those countries by default are ahead, but I think the others will catch up because the journey seems to be fairly similar once you get past what I have found across countries, and I've written a short article about it on my LinkedIn profile also, is this country culture dominate corporate culture. So I've lived and worked in different countries where I've worked with multinationals, where at the head office there have been brilliant gender balance policies, but at a regional level, the country culture kicks in, which is, how do people behave? How are you supposed to behave in the environment? And you, obviously by default, you bring in those values into the workplace, because you can't be one person in the workplace and another person outside. You would have the same values. So definitely there are countries where culturally women are at a disadvantage for whatever reason, whether that is simply because they've been held back and seen as actually inferior for whatever reason, or whether they've just been held back simply because of a lack of presence or education. Country culture does always dominate. Dubai in particular, though, I will say, has, I think the area where it's overcome in these countries. So where that kind of the missing link, I think, to get from one side to the other happens is where leadership
Right.
starts. It acts by example.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in the UAE, many women are being put forward by leadership, and it took a few years. But the minute women start to get prominent portfolios in the government,
Mm-hmm.
I come from a country called Pakistan, and in Pakistan as well, to set aside what you hear in the media, we've had Benazir Bhutto, who was, the first Muslim prime minister, female prime minister, twice over. We've had women, and we have women who are generals, who led armies, who've been stand-in presidents, etc. And I find, and you might find this trend also with the current pandemic, the way government leaders are handling them, when there are women in leadership, government leadership, there is a shift in that country's mindsets over time. Why? Because men and women both learn to report into a senior woman.
Right.
That's as simple as I will put it. When you get used to having a woman as your boss and telling you the story at such a senior level, at a presidential or a prime minister level, that has a knock-on domino effect after a period of time, because you can grumble outside, but you have to do it.
Right.
So to your point, it may be painful, but that perception then becomes that shifts and it becomes a habit. So culturally, absolutely, country culture does typically dominate. But wherever there are women at the top, it happens. And every country, I think, is on a journey. There's some who've acknowledged it and are well ahead, and those are developed markets. And then there are others, developing markets, which will get there, but they're just in that path.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Culture is just, it's fascinating on how things work. I worked with a young woman several years ago, and she was from Iran, and she had recently graduated from college. She actually went to college here in the United States. And she was sharing with me that in Iran at that point, it was very difficult for women to do business. And it was because of culture. She could not go up and introduce herself to a man. That was just not done. She had to be introduced by another man. And this may have changed. This was several years ago, but so she was sharing that she actually worked with her uncle, because that way, he could do the introductions. But for her, technology was fabulous, because there was LinkedIn, and especially LinkedIn, because she was using it as a business tool. She didn't have to be introduced by anybody or anything like that. And so she could reach out, she could connect with people, and it took a mind shift for herself initially, because she was used to having to be introduced. So when she got past okay, I can do this myself. But then, and so she loved LinkedIn. She just thought it was the greatest thing in the world, because there was no culture, shall we say, on LinkedIn. But that just, that was, and she told me, she said, sadly, she probably wouldn't be able to go home and truly be a businesswoman. And again, this was several years ago, because of the culture, but I think things are changing. And it's funny, I think what the other thing that changes it, not just the fact that people get used to reporting to a woman as boss, all those various things, when they see that a woman makes money and is successful, they're like, oh, okay, this does work.
Very true. When they see that that the decisions and the actions being put in place and the decisions being taken are actually, providing an ROI. Yes, absolutely. That's when minds, if that woman gets a chance to show them that, absolutely. That's what ultimately, I hope, will also change the stakeholder minds that we talked about earlier, the ones who think that women on the board is a mark against them. So, yes.
And the other thing that is going to maybe make drastic changes, who knows, is the pandemic. We've kind of touched on that a little bit. And as we're recording this, we're smack dab in the middle of it. It's a variety of things going on around the world, with total shutdowns, partial shutdowns, all sorts of things, but a lot of people working from home. And to me, I think there's a benefit to having a woman boss when you're working from home, because men in many occasions, and obviously I'm stereotyping here, are more of the want to look over your shoulder, want to be more in control type of boss. And that's obviously been successful. You know, all these companies have been making lots of money. But women tend to be more, you know what works for you? Is it better for you to be working at night than having to do this during the day? As long as you're getting your work done, hey, that's great. You know, and I see, and of course, there's absolutely no way to know for sure at this point in time. I think a lot of companies, especially here in the US, are going to go, yeah, we liked people working from home. It saved us a lot of money. Why are we renting all of this space or owning these buildings or, you know, all of these various things? And again, as long as the work gets done, who really cares? You know, it was difficult, obviously, at first for everybody around the world because it was, you're not going to work tomorrow. You know, and so nobody had the right equipment. Nobody had any of those, you know, all of those things. So once all that got settled down, I think, you know, I think companies are going to figure out it's going to help. And then, you know, you toss in the fact that many children around the world, I think, are probably going to start digital learning. You know, people just aren't comfortable putting their kids back in schools, and or schools aren't opening. I mean, we're really struggling with that here in Atlanta right now, trying to figure out what they're going to be doing. So I think this, you know, I mean, you always hate to say that there's good things to come out of a pandemic, but there are. I mean, you know, out of anything that are bad, you have good things that come out. I think we're going to, you know, hopefully see a rise in more women managers, owners, executives.
Yes, Deb, I think you're right in terms of we're going to see a jump, I really hope, in terms of people being more flexible and managers being more flexible towards employees, which is one of the primary reasons that women have to exit corporate life in the first place, what used to be corporate life. On the other hand, though, what is really alarming, and this is coming out throughout the world, in the US, UK, Canada, India, you name it, it's coming through, are two other areas. One is that the load of caregiving still remains the woman's responsibility. So when she's home, even if both parents or both partners are working, it's still up to the woman who has to do the home learning and who gets the bulk of the responsibility.
The laundry, the cooking, the
Yes, correct. So even though they both may be at home, and that's creating a lot of extra pressure on women. The other thing is that there are far more women, and this is alarming, who are losing their jobs in the pandemic, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, anyway, women typically end up being at a lower level or having spent a shorter tenure in the roles that they're in. This is a US-based study. Than their male counterparts. When women leave, again, survey of I think about 9,000 people, and I'm happy to share the links with you afterwards to include, they take longer to find those jobs, and they don't typically get as well-paying jobs. In April alone in the US, more women lost jobs than were created for women between the end of the Great Recession 2009 and Feb 2020. Wiped out. So yes, so while in terms of employee and organizational culture, I think there'll be some positive shifts which would definitely benefit women as well. I think it's really important for mindsets within the home or the older ones of caregiving and just the layoffs that are happening and why they're happening to shift. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really is a weird time. It's going to be, you know, it'll be interesting 6 months to a year from now. I think that's how long it's going to take to really start getting back to what might be normal. You know, and I mean, this is just, it's very strange. You know, but you know, assuming we don't have a pandemic situation. So you know, let's think of the world as being normal. How do we start, you know, one of the things that I always ask my guests for speaking points, and you said, you know, there's no corporate ladder for women there, and you know, and you mentioned the fact that mid-level range is where the issue is. How do we really put our teeth into solving this problem?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. I'll just talk a little bit about it. I've called it the hourglass effect. So basically, based on the data that we've got primarily out of the US, also the UK, Canada, and we're looking at researchers elsewhere as well in other countries, we found that the primary years of career growth, which are usually typically in your 30s, are also the years which are typically the first years of caregiving.
Right.
And therefore, women lose out.
Mm-hmm.
And until the children are at a much older age, or at least, middle school, they keep losing out. And that's
Mm-hmm.
perception driven again. So,
Mm-hmm.
they have to take on more caregiving duties. They may need more flexible hours. They may not be able to take on as much travel as they used to. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a mark against them. Now, the other factor, which is only just being spoken about globally, and I think part of that is us women ourselves. At the start, I said, "Oh, I'm so happy you called me young," and you said, "Yes, it's a woman thing." Is called gendered ageism.
Mm-hmm.
So ageism hits women at the age of around 40 on
Mm-hmm.
average. For men, it's around 49, and what that means is that is the age when your skill set counts for less than your actual age. Your age starts to play a role. So there are
Mm-hmm.
numbers where over the past 30 years in the US, cases based on ageism have
Mm-hmm.
gone up for close to about 18% for women
Mm-hmm.
and have gone down by 15% for men. So that double whammy is why I said this is an hourglass effect, because a
Mm-hmm.
corporate ladder suggests you can keep climbing, but there
Right.
comes a point where it's so narrow that you're
Mm-hmm.
forced out or you're stuck. And the women who do get through have done so at an extreme personal cost versus a male counterpart,
Right.
typically a disproportionate cost. And when they do get through that part, then it's more, we know that about 74% of CEOs are hired internally. So they do have a slightly easier, relatively easier path there. But this is why I call it the hourglass effect. It's not a corporate ladder, because that's where the squeeze happens.
Mm-hmm. Right. What struck me as we were talking about this is, one of the reasons why people say, oh, well, we can't hire a woman is hormones, right? Once a month, women get cranky, we get pissy, we get whatever. And then we have ageism striking when about the point where there's menopause, so you don't have those hormones. This is just all very confusing. But what it's really showing is people are in some ways looking for any reason to not hire a woman. And so it's, it is tricky because there's just so many factors and obviously so many misperceptions. I mean, the hormone thing, that's definitely one of the things. I mean, yeah, there are women who sometimes, have issues, but sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in their body. But, if you can have a woman who has her monthly period as the queen, as a general, as prime ministers, all these various things, well, then, you probably could have her as the manager of your department too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think that comes from the data and empathy point that we mentioned earlier, which is that if you take a look at the data, because all this is driven by bias. So I think the men and women who would not select a woman who's as skilled as a male counterpart, for the larger part, I don't think anybody does it deliberately, by the way. It is what it is. So it's an age-old thing. So I think when you start looking at actual facts, so for example, if appraisals happen, performance appraisals, and examples in there are given but supported, so any assessment is done supported by examples. So over the years, the different countries, the different companies I've worked with, I'm sure I've rarely, if ever, got at a leadership level examples to support, good or bad. And I think that removes the objectivity. And objectivity removes bias. Sorry, that brings the objectivity, and objectivity removes bias. So I think that's very important. The second thing is, I think the way this has worked at a C-suite level, there needs to be some form of policy where the private and the government sector comes together to put, because there are things that have worked in the public sector to bring in women. We talk about prime ministers, presidents, generals. There's something that's worked there. And maybe there's something we can learn to bring to the private sector to this level, to ensure that hourglass isn't that narrow and not just at the cost of women.
Right. And I think one of the important things when we have women at those levels is that they still feel like they can be a woman, a female. I had a guest on several weeks ago, and we were talking about this because she works with people who are female breadwinners. So they're the mom in the house, but they're also the primary breadwinner. And so we talked about the fact that a lot of times when women get those higher levels, they think they have to become a man. Look at how many women, and I was, one of those who wore a suit. Now granted, I like pants better than a dress. I mean, just in general, but the women wear the suit. You mentioned that sometimes people thought that you were cold. I think women tend to, in many cases do that. We're trying to not show our emotions. I've been told before, when I was, back in the corporate world, not to have pictures of my family, in my office. Things like that. But then, you look at the CEO's office and he's got his kid's soccer picture or whatever. I mean, and so there's definitely that double standard there. But, when women feel like we can still be, and I'm putting this in my little air quotes, feminine, that's a good thing. Because again, we need to have that empathy, that caring, that concern in our companies. I think that's where we really lose employees in general, is when they've got that hard ass boss who just is and it doesn't matter if what sex the boss is. The people are like, I'm just not going to work for somebody like that. I don't need to be micromanaged. I want to have my own schedule. I want to have pictures of my kids on my desk. I mean, all these various things. I think as we're empowering employees more, hopefully that means that we're going to see more women in charge also.
Yes, I mean, such incredibly important points in there. So one was when you said the pictures of a family, I immediately recalled the incident of the BBC reporter, if you remember, his son, that man and his children came running, and it was very cute, very sweet. And quite a debate raged after that. Had that been a woman and children had run into the room, would the reactions have been the same? It's like when a dad brings home-baked cookies to the park for the kids and, everybody goes, oh, what a caring dad, whereas for a mom, it's supposed to be. So I agree. I think the other very important point is leadership. So because leadership behaviors so far have been masculine, hence we automatically get graded against a set of behaviors that are primarily masculine. It also gives rise to something called a queen bee syndrome. Have you heard of the queen bee syndrome?
No, but I can imagine what it's going to be.
So the queen bee syndrome is the mean girl syndrome from school. And what that is it's women who actually are, holier than the Pope, more royal than the Queen, whatever you want to call it, but show far more masculine behaviors, come down harder on women, and are bullying women more in the workplace. And it comes typically out of a sense of insecurity, I would say, that because they feel the need to adhere to those masculine behaviors and demonstrate them is what will help them keep climbing the ladder. And that is exactly as you said, it's the absence of appropriate feminine behaviors at the top. And I think when we've had sufficient number of women leaders in corporate roles who act as women, who if they're emotional, it's taken as a positive aspect because it's bringing emotion to a proposition, a product or a service for a consumer where we do need that kind of feeling. I think that's when things will change. There's some way to go yet.
And the good thing is, as we make those shifts, then men are more comfortable showing their softer side. I mean, for lack of a better way to say that, to show that they're concerned about their employees, to put their kids' pictures on their desk, all these various things. And so this is a good thing that we're doing this.
Yes, it gives men permission as well. And I'll tell you, in my experience, and in my team, at one point, there were more men than women. But people I've talked to all over the world, it's just everybody's learning, right? Men and women, that there's this bias that exists and they want to do away with it. But when I talked about data and empathy, we do a series of I won't go into that detail, of boot camps and online. But what we do use is we begin through empathy. So what we ask during our introductions, and it's a fantastic technique if you ever want to try it anywhere, is that when there are men in the room, we ask them to talk about one woman close to them, a female close to them, who's been affected. Because then for the rest of the boot camp, it becomes an unconscious benchmark. So everybody's had experience or can think of a girlfriend or a partner or a spouse who's been through this, or a sister, or they're the children of a single mother, or they have daughters themselves. And this brings it works. Empathy works. The other thing we found in talking to people around the world and men around the world as well is that there's also, I mean, they feel they'll be kicked out of the boys' club. And this does exist. This is not a
Right. They'll have to
hypothesis.
give
This
up
is
their man
research based.
card.
Correct, correct. So, if they look like they actually care about women or they're becoming emotional, etc., there's almost like a stigma to varying levels across different countries, of course, against them. And you are so right. So when people are allowed to show emotions that normally would have been affiliated or associated with women, I think the workplace will become more open. It's definitely going to be more agile, so more flexible. People will be able to talk about what they want to do. They'll be able to bring solutions to the table and faster turnaround time for challenges like the pandemic that we are facing, because they'll be able to talk about it, be emotional. Such an important part, and that empathy will exist across the board in the organization.
Right. It's interesting when a man cries, it captures your attention. I was just a wee little thing when President Kennedy was shot. I mean, I really was just, not even a year old, maybe a year old. I was a little, so certainly not aware of what was going on. But, I still remember seeing pictures, and you still see pictures of Walter Cronkite, who was the burliest, manliest reporter, the tears. That's what captured people's attention. They knew immediately something was very seriously wrong. And so when you see men show empathy and sympathy, it really does capture somebody's attention. And without going into any political discussion, one of the complaints here in the United States has been that President Trump hasn't shown that, or certain governors and leaders. I mean, and so that's kind of one of those things too, is, you have to show that sympathy for people. When President Bush was so upset after September 11th, that captured people's attention. And so it's kind of interesting how when you bring emotion in with men, it's like, oh my, we have to pay attention now.
Very true. And I guess I try to, if you ask me, I'll always try to find the silver lining in everything, because everything's got a lesson that you can learn, right? And it may be a really hard lesson. And I don't think anybody envies what the United States is going through right now in any way. And we hope you'll come through it, because it is a great nation. I think just the fact that if you have a leader who doesn't show the sort of empathy or sympathy, it's an implicit acknowledgement that is an essential trait, which may not have been as visible before. But it's an acknowledgement. So now you have the right to go back and say, right, this is the quality, or this is the need we have anywhere where there is leadership, be it government, be it corporate. So on the flip side, perhaps that if there is an opportunity to start building that and for actively talking about it, it's not just a wussy emotion to have on the side, but actively could be built into metrics, performance, required skills. And I think it goes back to the point of what you said about masculine leadership. It could actually start changing that angle a lot as well.
Right. And it's funny, my perception here in the United States of when England took notice of the pandemic was when the Queen went and did a national broadcast, because she doesn't do those. So the fact that the Queen came and did, now I just like the Queen. I think that's, but when she said, this is something serious, again, people went, oh my gosh, we have to pay attention to this.
Yes, absolutely. And Jacinda in New Zealand, etc. So now let's not forget the group of men and women behind them, because there was a group
of on
every
side.
But absolutely, I think that acknowledgement of that kind of need for nurturing abilities and those skills, again, referencing back in organizational agility, the set of skills that's required, a very large part of them are what we call womanly skills, or whatever you want to call them, which is around nurturing, democracy, getting everybody in, inclusive approaches. So I think, so when there are a lot more women at the top, I think we're hopefully going to see an improvement in performance as well.
Right.
It's about getting them there and keeping them there and letting
Right.
them be themselves.
Right. And of course, one of the things is women typically are better at communicating things. One of the companies I worked for had a male CEO, and we were struggling. I mean, we had a lot of issues, and he wanted to hide in his office. And I shouldn't say it that way. He was very, very busy. I mean, it wasn't hiding. He was trying to solve those problems, but he needed to be in front of his people. He needed to reassure them, and he needed to almost show that emotion and say, here's what's going on. And I don't know that a woman in that position would have, what they would have done, but it does seem to me, and again, anecdotally, that women are the better communicators during times like this. And the trick is to not be too emotional, right?
Yes, correct. Let me tell you a little story that I think your listeners will find very interesting, your audience. When I was working for one of the multinationals that's headquartered in a developed market, I was in the leadership team in a developing market, and I was told that I have to be like a mother to the rest of the team, and I was shocked because that was actually to be in my appraisal, and I complained about it later to the head office, and there was a little bit of an uproar, but country culture again dominating organizational culture. Now that was not said in any bad way. It just in a way, when I look back, it was terrible. It should not be said to any woman, I mean, what do you think? Am I here as a mother? But it acknowledged the nurturing capabilities, I think the communication capabilities, the ability to pull people together, and in a time of challenge or crisis.
Right. But it just shouldn't have been said. So, well, there's a good thing that is an offshoot of all of this, and that's that many women, you, me, lots of women are just fed up with this. And we're going off and we're starting our own businesses. Talk about that. Talk about how many women are becoming entrepreneurs.
Yes, so this huge spurt in women entrepreneurship, where, and again, a number coming out of the US, where until 2019, about in entrepreneurship sector growth, a CAGR growth over 5 years of about 9%, 21% was driven by women, so ahead of the average. And also, the hourglass effect kicks in here. So a lot of women entrepreneurs, the average age of a woman entrepreneur is 40. That's also the age when she's pushed out of the hourglass.
Right. She realizes she's not going anywhere higher.
Yeah. Or she's pushed out, one or the other. So it's not necessarily a voluntary move to entrepreneurship. However, these women are also extremely skilled. They've been in a corporate area. They're extremely educated. So in the US alone, the vast majority are have a master's degree or more, and they're seen as very creative. The products they put out, obviously, because of the skills and experience they bring to the table, are very creative, and therefore there's greater opportunity, and you'll see that happening here. So what I do want to call out is that we see the projection of women, 20s, younger women. The average age of an entrepreneur is 40. It's not 20 something. What's very critical for these women is these women who are still, despite all the odds growing, and we know they have the odds stacked against them. We know that they have relatively less access to finance. Their networks are weaker. All of these are really important to building a strong business. But they're still going ahead and going against this. I think women have and then this is my personal feel, I think they have this inbuilt resilience, where a vast majority of them are coming from caregiving roles. So they need to be, they need to take care not just of themselves, also of their dependents. So there's this inbuilt resilience. I think it's also a great way for the younger generation that's moving in to actually see what's happening and how women are leading their own businesses. So you talked about corporate, and a lot of the leaders at the top are men. But as the women entrepreneurship, so leaders in women-owned businesses grow, or women-owned businesses grow, I think that's a great parallel sector for younger women to look to emulate the values that have actually grown those businesses from the ground up. Now, what is very key, and I think this is where women come in as well, as men in organizations, is financial support for these women who turn to entrepreneurship. This is very, very critical. You can only be creative when you have the right fiscal policies in place. You have enough money to start off your business. I think the Grameen Bank is a great example of a blue collar example coming from Bangladesh. And the gentleman who set it up there was later, he was awarded a Nobel Prize as well, where he gave women in villages a little bit of money to set up their own, with the assumption that women will provide a return if they're entrusted. And sure enough, it was a great success. I know there's some private companies that are also partnering with him, Danone being one example. But we know that women entrepreneurship is growing despite the odds, and women are leading the growth in that sector, at least in the US.
Right. And I love that we are figuring out ways to specifically support women. When I lived in Colorado, I was part of an organization it was a business organization, but we had a philanthropic part where we gave micro business loans to women in Africa. And, when we say micro, they're like $500, which here in the United States, you're like, whatever. In Africa, that was an annual budget. And these were typically to women who maybe their spouse had died, or in some circumstances, there were women who had been raped. And so they were immediately ostracized by their society, all sorts of things like that. And so this $500 made all the difference in the world to them. I mean, it really did keep them alive in many cases. And I mean, I just thought that was a phenomenal program to be a part of.
It is a phenomenal program. And I would just ask the question that, is there an opportunity within the US for any given state or even any given city to pilot that exact one, make it analogous, whatever that 500 number equates to here, and then see what the returns come through on that. I think that's a really important project that probably needs to happen. It would make a huge difference to women entrepreneurs.
Right. So as women, what do we need to be doing about this? And that's like a 10-hour conversation, I know.
I'm kind of going, prioritizing in my head. I think the first part is acknowledgement. I think we need to acknowledge that this is not right and unfair. And I know that there is fatigue around this conversation. There is fatigue around a lot of conversations. They still need to be spoken about. They do need to be talked about, number one. So I think there needs to be an acknowledgement amongst women themselves that it's okay and it's right to talk about what's happening in the workplace to them. It's not cribbing. A lot of women don't want to. I've spoken to women who said we don't want to talk about it because it looks like we're whining about our lot. Well, you know what? You have the right to talk about it because it is against you. The second thing, I think men must be a part of the solution. Men have to be. Just like women bring a set of skills to the table, men bring a set of skills to the table. And so those men who who obviously know or are close to some woman or female who has been affected or who see what's happening and they want to make a change. I see my son and he is so aware and he asks me about things that are happening that Mama, why certain projects that I know that I don't understand that I've lost out on sometimes in the past. And he's asked me, he said, Mama, was it because you're a woman? And I said, I don't know for sure, but I'm sure my son is not the only one who thinks this, which is great. It's acknowledgement. It's an awareness. But I think both men and women have to come to the table and women have to understand. The last thing I would say is the story has to be told right. So it's the right story. Story has to be told right. For example, let me give you an example. The refugee crisis, I know we're about to come to the end of our session, so I'll be very quick. The Syrian refugee crisis, there was fatigue around that conversation because when you realize you can't, there is a reason for it. When you realize you can't make a difference, you're a drop in the ocean, you try not to look at it, you stop caring. However, that very tragic picture of that child who had washed up on the shore, the 3-year-old, it created a wave of furor around the world. Why? Because it was empathy. You felt it. It could have been anybody you knew. It could have been, God forbid, your own child. And I think that is where that's really critical, to tell the story right. And that story gets told right when you bring in real people on the ground. It's not ivory tower speeches. When you actually go and get stories and testimonials that are visible to people who are influential enough to make the change. So C-suite leaders, government policymakers, but you show them. We know how powerful video is. These stories, it's the right story. It needs to be told right. You need to see what those people are going through so that it can create the empathy around it.
Right. Right. And as you mentioned, it needs to be told right. That's the tricky thing, is to make sure that it's not exploitive or that we're because people, we don't like to be told we have to feel bad. But if I come to that conclusion on my own, that's very different. It's kind of like all the Facebook posts that say, you won't forward this because. I'm like, I won't forward it because I just don't do that. Don't try and guilt me into doing that. Or things like that. But of course, also, that doesn't stick with me. But when I've come to that conclusion on my own, that should stick with me. I mean, you mentioned your son, so maybe the next time he's going to remember what it was and think about it again and think, now, wait a minute, is this going to happen to my sister? I know your kids are young, but at some point he's going to think, is this going to happen to my wife or to my daughter? Hopefully by the time he has a wife and a daughter, this is a non-issue. It's always, I always think, when we can get rid of the terms describing things, like when we say the first Black college president, that happened a little bit, the first female this, the first, when we stop having to use those descriptors, that to me is when we're successful, because it's like, oh, okay, whatever. And that's, I'm probably not going to be alive when that happens. I mean, it's just, as you said, this takes time. So I think the big thing is we just have to remember, we just have to keep chipping away at it, telling the stories, letting people know what's going on.
Very true, very true. And to your point, just to wind up, when it becomes the norm, I mean, what you said shivers down my spine in a good way. That when you don't feel the need to qualify that statement, when it's okay, is when you know that things have really changed. So, yeah, that day is going to come.
Yep. Well, Naheed, oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. See, this is why I set a timer, because I could just keep talking about this, and it's almost dinner time for you. So on a Friday as we're recording this, so you're done for the day. Tell us a little bit about your company and what you do.
So my company is called Global Consulting, and what we do is to actually find patterns that haven't been seen before, and that's through insights and talking to consumers. And then share those with clients. And while one part of that is around market entry strategy, so focusing on how companies can enter markets, set up their propositions, set up their digital. The other part is very much, and focus part is around unconscious bias. So beginning from gender bias, so identifying patterns that are running in an organization or within that sector, and sharing it with company leaders who would want to make a shift. We bring that in the format of employee engagement. We believe that middle management is pivotal to change, not top leadership. Middle management is what changing is. And we do that through boot camps, so offline boot camps, so they go back online. But we do it in a way where there are specific metrics that need to be achieved, because back to the point that was mentioned earlier, it has to be kept being done in order to become a habit. It cannot be a one-off. So, yeah.
Right. I love it. And again, it's iwill.global, not .com, .global. And I will, and I'm looking on your website. So I will grow, I will solve, I will work, I will blog, and I will consulting. And so, it's great. You've got lots of great resources there. So I encourage people to check that out. How do they connect with you personally?
You can reach out to us at info@iwill.global, or at my personal email, which is Naheed, Naheed, at iwill.global, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Perfect. And you mentioned LinkedIn, so that's probably a good place.
Correct.
Perfect. Yeah. I love it. Well, Naheed, this really has been fascinating. And I'll be honest, a little frustrating, because things aren't moving as fast as they should be, according to me. But they are moving, so that's good. It's just kind of like molasses. We need to, and so maybe the pandemic will change things. I mean, who knows?
Yes.
But so we'll have to chat again in maybe 6 months to a year to see, if there have been changes, what's going on in the world. So I definitely hope that we can set that up. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave everyone with?
Just about the telling the story right, really, what I had said earlier, that it isn't just telling the right story, but telling the story right. So when you're talking to somebody, do watch how they're reacting to how you're telling the story and tailor it accordingly. And I think all of us, no need for in-depth, but we can get that feeling, because that is how you will shift mindsets. There's just no other way. If it was just data, we'd know. So tell the story, but tell it right as well. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show. It was fantastic, and I hope your audience gets something out of this. And I'm looking forward to connecting again at some point.
I love it. I love it. We're going to have so much fun. And until then, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having an absolutely fascinating discussion with Naheed Chowdhry. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.